Well, I think since I have 10:05 on my clock, so I think let's go ahead and start, and I'll make a few opening comments, and by the time I'm done, maybe more the other few will be here. But again, I just want to welcome everyone for joining us this morning for our first ever webinar. This is the first time we've tried something like this. It would be great if we could be in person, but right now in our state of the world today, most things have gone virtual. So we're trying this out, and hopefully this will be of some value to you. My name is Paul Deakins. I serve as the Director of Development at Catholic Charities. I oversee the corporate and foundation relation group, as well as the major and planned gift officer group. And we're finding as we work with those that as we work with the people for major gifts and planned gifts, we're finding that we realize that some gifts are not as simple as just writing a check. There's a lot of planning that needs to going with it. And so as we've worked as a team, we felt that it was really necessary and important to provide information and some guidance and education on gift planning and on developing one's legacy. So we thought we promote the benefits of thoughtful planning as people are talking about developing their estate plan, and if charitable planning comes into play there, we want to be able to provide the most education we can there. We are very thankful for those that have remembered Catholic Charities in their states over the years. We have a long history of support through that area. Currently, we have over 400 individuals that have already named Catholic Charities in their will and estate plan. And just with that importance to them, that the programs that they have supported year after year after year continue on in the future. And so that was a value to them as they did their planning. And we've been definitely the beneficiary of that. And it's been exciting to see that happen. This morning, we're going to be talking with Mariah Brooke from the St. Paul, Minnesota Foundation. We have a long time history with the St. Paul, Minnesota Foundation, both as a grantor from their foundation, supporting the work that we do, as well as with their donors. Many of their donors and clients have donor advised funds, and we are the beneficiary on many of those gifts. And that's how we've developed that relationship over the years. This past year, we've become a little more formal partnership with them as they're serving as the administrator of our charitable gift annuity program, as well as to do things like this, which I think is wonderful, to bring the expertise of the foundation in to help have these kind of conversations, because this is what they do, is they help many of their clients and donors work through some of these issues. And to be able to have Mariah speak to us today, I think is just an added benefit for us. So before I pass it off to Mariah for her to introduce herself and jump in, I just wanted to set a few ground rules in the virtual world. We want this to be interactive, so feel free to ask questions, either typing it in the chat or asking it out loud. The one question or the request I do have is, when you're not speaking, if you could mute yourself so that we can keep the background noise down to a minimum, and then you can just hit unmute, ask your question. But we do want it to be interactive and have fun as much as you can when we're talking about these issues. But again, thanks for being here, and I'll kick it over to Mariah.
Awesome. Thanks, Paul. Well, I think this conversation is really fun. I think talking about our values and the things that we really want to leave behind us in the world is a really fun topic. So I'm excited to be here with all of you today. As Paul said, my name is Mariah Brooke. I serve as a gift planner at the St. Paul, Minnesota Foundation. And so what that really means is I think it's kind of like, my title could be like party planner, gift planner. So it's like I get to help people make really powerful, impactful gifts to the organizations that they care about. And I think we should have a party when people are making those gifts. And we know that people make gifts really the why, they care about the organization, they care about the things that are happening at organizations like Catholic Charities. And obviously there's so many great things happening within the organization. And so I'm excited to kind of talk a little bit more about how donors can think about charitable estate planning and really think about it from a values-based perspective. All right, so I'm going to get my slides up here. And all right, can you see the slides all right? Thumbs up, perfect. All right, so to start, I want to ask you to grab either a piece of paper, a scratch piece of paper, or maybe you have your phone and you can use the notes section. but I'm going to walk us through a little bit of an exercise to kind of get us going and get us in kind of the thought space for what we're going to talk about this morning. And so again, take a second, grab a piece of paper, grab something to take some notes on. But what I really want us to think about as we start thinking about legacy planning, estate planning, is really our values, because at the end of the day, that's the most important thing. And that's what our estate is really saying. At the end of our life, whatever is left, and we know we can't take anything with us, what happens? And we really want our values to be reflected in our plans. And so some might say, well, gosh, my values truly, my family, my kids, my grandkids. And so that's reflected in their estate planning, because that's who they're maybe leaving their the majority of their estate to. So we really just want to be intentional and think through that. So I'm going to lead us through an exercise here, but a few questions that I want you to be thinking about as we get started are, what are the things that you think are essential for a person's well-being? So what are those things that you think everybody should have? It should be a human right. Everybody should just get, and it's really what makes a well-rounded person. Second, when you hear about world events or witness an injustice, what moves you most? So what types of injustices, challenges, things really kind of picks at your heart? And then, is there a pattern in the way that you invest or spend your money? You might look back over your years of giving and think, what types of organizations have I given to? What are the causes? What are the things that they are tackling, the challenges that they're tackling? And then, is there a pattern in the way that you spend your time? So what are the organizations and things that you've been volunteering with? It could be the places that you just go and attend. So your place of worship, your children's school, things like that. So where are you involved in spending your time? So with those grounding questions in our mind, up on the screen, you will see that there is a list of values. And so what I would like you to do on that piece of paper or on your phone, on your notes section, is write down what your top 5 values are. So this is not an all-inclusive list, right? There's a lot of other things that you might consider writing, but I'm just going to pause for a moment and give everybody a moment to just write down, when you kind of look at this list, what are your top 5 values? And I will do the same. All right, I'll give about another 30 seconds or so. All right, awesome. And something that could be interesting too, for those of you, if you have a spouse, I think it's always interesting to have each spouse do the list separately and see where there's alignment or where there are different words, and perhaps a different word is chosen, but it's getting at the same concept. And, it's a really interesting conversation. Well, why did you choose that word? And where does that come from? So something that you might consider if your spouse isn't on the call with you today. Okay, so that might have been challenging. I know it's really hard to take all of the things that you care about and narrow it down to 5, but I'm going to ask you to do the harder thing, which is to narrow that down to 3. So that list of 5 that you created, if you could just try narrowing it down, what are the 3 things that I really value that I would want to pass on to the next generation, the things that you just really want to see in the world? And I'd love to hear from some of you. What did that feel like? Was it easier to narrow it down to 5, or was it easier to narrow it down to 3? What was kind of the experience just even going through that? And staff, I'd love to hear your thoughts too. This is a good exercise for all of us.
It was hard to get it down to 5
Okay.
and even harder to 3.
Usually when I do this with individuals and families a lot, and I have cards and I make them start with 10 and then 5 and then 3, and then they really don't like me after that. That's a big challenge. Thanks, Frank. Any other thoughts on just the process of how do you narrow all the things that you care about down to a few?
Yeah, I think it's this is Gary. I think it sort of depends on what your audience is in terms of these issues. If it's your immediate family, if it's a broader based family, if it's the community at large. Because I looked at this and I sort of, initially I was looking at how it impacts my family. And then I thought, no, I think I'd rather do it backwards. How does it affect the community? And then how does the community impact my family? And so I did it on a much broader scale, I think.
Got it. Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense that you would kind of think about it in 2 different ways. So I like that, Gary. Thanks for sharing that.
I think, Gary, that actually summed up a lot of how I was thinking too. I think my first list of 5, I was much more family related and much more personal related. But then as you start thinking more about how do you extend that from a legacy, then I actually went off my top 5 list and actually picked another one. So I was kind of that same thought process that Gary went through.
Yeah. And I've done this exercise with families over, spans of years. And it's interesting too, to see how, depending on seasons of life or what has happened, different things change. So, my husband and I did this exercise many years ago when we first got married. And then in January of this year, we had our first child. And I can tell in what I wrote down that being a mom and just that experience has changed kind of the way I think about this question and what do I want to pass on to Charlotte. So thank you all for taking just the time to think through this. Something kind of as a continuation for this. Let me get to the next slide there. I'd be curious, how do you think these values became so near and dear to you? Does anybody have a story that they'd be willing to share that you think back and, you can say, I know that this is where that value comes from. It was from this family member or this experience I had growing up. So I'll give you some time to think about that. But then I'd also ask you to think about, do your values currently influence or guide your estate plans? And so we kind of talked about that a little bit, that there's maybe 2 different perspectives. What do I want my kids to, for example, to really think about via my legacy, but also then what does my estate look like and are they different? And then does your family know what your values are? And if have you had that conversation with them? So I'll go back to the first question and just ask if anybody is willing to share one of their values and perhaps a story, how and why that is near to who you are. And I can go ahead, I will get us started. So one of mine is faith. And that is just, I was raised in a church and, understood from a very young age what it meant to have, a faith in Jesus. And that's something that has continued throughout my life and is, something that I want to instill in my daughter. And so that's something that's really critical, as my husband and I think about both our giving, but then also how we parent our child and all of the things, we really just want our faith to be central to our lives. And so we want, and as we went through our first estate planning this year, now that we have a child, we really thought about how do we include that? How does that value show up in our plans? So that's just one example, but I'd welcome others.
I would say that
Go ahead, Mary.
Family, came up as one, not just what?
Oh, go ahead, Mary.
Am I unmuted? Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you couldn't hear me. No, I was just going to say, I would say, family came up still as one of my top, not just because it was important to me, but I think getting back to the community at large and doing the work that I've done in the community to see how the lack of family has impacted folks. And so how important that has been in my own life and in the life of other people that I see as successful, is they've had that family to fall back on, both emotionally and financially, in that. And at times that seems to be lacking in a lot of folks that are facing major issues. So
Thanks for sharing that, Mary. Gary, I think I saw you unmuting yourself.
Yeah, I was, one of the five that I had listed was integrity. And especially with all that everyone is going through today with COVID and the different people's reactions to it, there seems to be a significant disconnect between what people say and what people do. And I've always thought that that was a very an integral part of who you are. Make sure that your actions are consistent with what your words are. And I think it's easy for people not to be that way. I think it takes more effort to make sure that those are consistent. But I think we have a better world if everyone is consistent in that regard.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Gary. All right. Well, I hope that this was a fruitful exercise for all of you. I'd encourage you to keep noodling on this, maybe share with your family, keep thinking about this. I think it's really something that we don't often pause to do. We just are kind of living our lives, and we might be living our values, but, to Gary's point, are our values being reflected in our own actions and in everything that we do? So we just encourage you to keep thinking about this. So kind of now that we've grounded ourselves in what our values are, the things that we really care about, I want to transition a little bit to talking about charitable legacy planning. And so, we've already talked about the why. So why somebody might give, right? They're motivated by these values. They have different organizations that they care about. So that's really the why. So I'm going to briefly cover the how and the what. So how could one leave a legacy, especially to charitable organizations? So obviously there's great ways to leave a legacy to heirs and children and things like that. But what does that look like to translate that to the larger community? And like we've named, we think about things maybe a little differently. There is kind of the broader legacy that we want to leave, and maybe a different one with our family. So, the how could be a simple will or trust. Both of those types of vehicles and instruments, it's very easy to name different individuals that you care about, different organizations that you care about as beneficiaries of those. Oftentimes people will do a percentage. And so, they might worry, well, I want to make sure that my kids get this percentage, but I could leave 5% to disperse or to this organization. And if there's $100 left at the end, then, they get $5. And if there's more than that, then they get more. But a percentage is a really great way to do that. A beneficiary designation, you're probably all familiar with having to fill out who receives money from your retirement accounts or your life insurance policies when you pass away. Organizations can easily be named as those beneficiaries, and they can also be contingent beneficiaries. So that was something that my husband and I set up once we had our daughter, was, saying, okay, if something really terrible happened, if the three of us were in an accident together and all three of us passed away, we would want, some of those dollars to go to one of our favorite organizations. And we shared that with them. And of course, we hope that doesn't happen, but we're grateful that there's a plan in place if something like that were to happen. Another how people can give a legacy gift is just through payable on death or transfer on death deeds. So this could be at your bank accounts, pieces of real estate. Sometimes it's easier to set things up this way than have them go through the traditional estate process. And then there's creative gifts that pay you income during your lifetime. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. But I think that's a fun tool and something that you might consider in your own planning. So the what. So you might have the tool, you've decided what tool makes sense for you. The what that you can give oftentimes is cash, stocks or bonds, retirement assets like we talked a little bit about, real estate, and then gifts of life insurance. So there's a whole number of ways that when we're thinking about leaving a financial legacy to organizations, we can pair the how with the what to decide what makes the most sense for you in your situation. So all of those vehicles are things that you can consider as you think about your plans. And Paul, I want to turn it to you just to share a little bit about kind of the story stories that you've had at Catholic Charities of how legacy gifts have really impacted the organization and impacted the donors that you work with.
Wonderful. Yeah. Thanks, Mariah. I think later on we'll be looking at, some examples of different strategies that will help provide solutions to or concerns that come up when people are doing certain types of estate planning. But I just wanted to share a little bit about how some donors that we've worked with have used planning to achieve both their own personal objectives and family objectives, as well as some of the charities they care about. One of the examples that I had really just kind of triggered, I've got another tiny little story I'm even adding into my notes about, based on our conversation about how did we learn about values as far as giving and things like that. And I didn't share in the previous section, but one of the, faith is very important to me as well, but also it was my family, my parents that actually modeled the behavior. And I've got two distinct memories. One, when we did as a young boy, two things. One, my parents would talk to us and we'd kind of sit about each week when Dad would write out the check to the church, what to do his tithe each week. And we talked about that. And even going and sitting in Sunday school with the little, I still remember the little plastic white church that we sent around, and we had our little coins that we put in. But it was talked about how we are giving to help others and the benefit of others. And so that was really modeled for me by my parents. One of the story I was going to share is we have a family that has been, supporting and volunteering one of our programs for many, many, many years. And they did it as a family as well. The parents started, but then they got their kids involved and they also served and volunteered. And just recently we learned that they also now have, through their estate plan, also left a very substantial gift to that particular program because they want to continue to see those clients served and that work being done in the community. And so they've used their estate plan to model that. We've also worked with donors that had very similar feelings of wanting to continue to support the organization. And so they actually looked at setting up, rather than a one-time gift through their estate, setting up an endowment at either a community foundation, like St. Paul, Minnesota Foundation or Catholic Community Foundation, that would generate that annual support that they've been giving for year after year after year to continue to give after they've passed on, because they still would like to see that work done. So that's another tool that someone has used that, again, I think it's just a way of what is their objective and their values and how do they want to transfer that value. We've also, Mariah talked a little bit about life income gifts, and we'll talk about that in the future, but that was another one where we've had folks that really want to participate and want to give, but they don't have the income. They can't give up that asset because they need the income to live on. And so there are different techniques and things that people have used, but one of the things is a charitable gift annuity, and we'll talk about that, but that was able for someone who can provide income for a loved one and then still benefit charity at the end. And I had worked with a donor 2 years ago where that was the case, where he had received, one of their main income streams was a pension. And he was very concerned about his wife. If he passed away first, that pension would be cut in half. And so he wanted to make sure that she was cared for. They opened a gift annuity or created a gift annuity, charitable gift annuity, so it would pay her for her entire lifetime. And then once she passed on, then the benefit would go to the Dorothy Day Center, which is a program of ours that they have supported for years. So again, it's how do you marry those two values? And so those are two examples of the many that we've had that just you're able to combine both of those pieces. So I'll pass that back to you, Mariah.
Yeah, Paul, I love that story. I think it's such a creative way to, tie in what the family's values were. So they cared so much about Dorothy Day Center, and there was a financial need. There was a desire to make sure that the wife was provided for if the husband passed away first, and the pension would change. So we can pair both those financial, real practical needs with our charitable hearts. I think I think God has designed giving so that the giver is the one that receives the joy. And so we want to make that really real, and make everybody kind of be able to have that opportunity. So I think that's a really great story. Thanks for sharing that. So one example that I want to share is Barry. farmer in southern Minnesota, and he really wanted to support the organization of his choosing in their fundraising campaign. So that was his first primary goal. But as a retired farmer, he also had the need to increase his fixed income. So, a lot of times farmers don't have traditional retirement accounts. They haven't been matched, right? They're self-employed, they're working for themselves. And so whenever I'm thinking and working with a donor family, I'm thinking about it in three categories. So first, what are their goals, both charitable and financial? And we saw that really, I think, demonstrated well in the story that Paul shared. It's combining both of those financial and charitable goals. And then we take a look at the tools. So what tools do the donors have at their disposal? What tools do you have at your disposal that could help you achieve those goals? And once we know those two things, then we can determine what technique makes the most sense. And we don't want to go out of order. Sometimes we think, oh, here's this really cool technique. Let's start there. And it's like, well, that might not actually achieve the goal that we want to. So starting with goals, this is kind of what Barry was thinking through. So the tools at his disposal were his primary home. He had about $1.5 million in different retirement assets. There was $150,000 that were sitting in CDs that were coming due. And he had about $75,000 in his checking and savings accounts. Well, he didn't want to get rid of his primary home. As you can imagine, he wasn't ready to leave his home. There would have been different consequences for him tapping into his retirement assets at the time. And so he didn't really want to take advantage of that. And the money in his checking and savings, well, he needs that for his life. That's what he needs when he needs to buy a new car. That's kind of his grocery. That's where everything is coming from. So none of those options felt like a good option for him. But he had these $150,000 in CDs coming due. And we all know where interest rates are at right now. So they weren't really, the CDs weren't really bringing in a lot of money for him. And so what the fundraiser that he was working with proposed to him was a charitable gift annuity. And a charitable gift annuity, we've talked about it a little bit, is a vehicle that donors can take advantage of. And there's 4 different steps. So first, the donor makes a gift of assets into the charitable gift annuity. When they make that gift, they get a tax deduction, and then they get fixed payments for life. The tax deduction is not a full tax deduction. I'll show an example here in a bit, but it's a partial tax deduction. So that can help in years where donors are thinking about their tax situation. And then when the donor passes away, or whoever the annuitant is passes away, whatever is left goes to the charitable organization. And if there's nothing left, then the organization doesn't get anything. So, the donor is not necessarily on the hook to make sure that dollars go there if they outlive kind of maybe what we thought that they would live. So we decided that this technique was what would work really well for Barry. So what he did was take the $150,000 that were in cash as a result of the CDs coming due, and he established a charitable gift annuity. The percentage rate that was determined based on his age was 4.3%. So again, that's going to be quite a bit higher than any interest rates he's earning in a money market account or a CD. And it's a consistent rate over time. So for Barry, then, the benefits, that first year when he made the gift, he had a charitable tax deduction of over $43,000, which, now we know what the standard deduction is. And so for him, that was really great. It was above the standard deduction. And so he was able to take advantage of that in that year. And then annually, he receives $6,450. And a portion of that is tax-free and a portion of that is considered ordinary income. But this was a really great way for him to supplement, again, his retirement, and at the end of life, make a substantial gift to an organization that he cared a lot about. So taking a step further then, the organization that he was working with took that $40,000, what they received when he passed away, and put it into an endowment fund. They were really thoughtful, kind of stewarding well. So as an example here, Catholic Charities put the dollars into an endowment fund. And that $40,000 then generated an annual gift of $1,600. And so that was, I think, one of the other benefits of this type of gift is it allows a donor to make sure that their annual gift keeps coming to the organization. So Paul and his team don't have to find another donor to replace that annual $1,500 gift that he had been giving. They have this coming into them through their endowment fund. And the more that we can kind of build out that, the more stable the organization is. And it allows them to just keep doing the good work. And right, in some ways, we wish that there wasn't a need for many of the services that are provided, but we know that that won't be the case, and that we are called to really care for the least of these. And this is one example of how a donor could be thoughtful about stewarding really their gift and continuing the great work of the organization.
Mariah,
Yeah.
I have a question. So the amount that he had to begin with was 150,000.
Yep.
And say here, 40,000 goes to Catholic Charities, whatever the charity is. Is that an actuarial calculation or something of what the value of the annual payments is?
Yep, great question. So that 40,000 is just, is kind of an example of what would be left when he passed away. So that 150,000, about 90 of it.
That's not a current gift to the charity. It's a gift at the end of his life.
Correct. Yep, exactly.
Oh, okay. So if he
Yes.
lives 15 years, the charity doesn't receive anything until the end of the 15 years.
Yep, that's correct.
Does the charity guarantee the payment to the individual even
Yep.
if it runs out of money?
Yep, it does. It does. And part of the way that it's calculated is it's designed so that that doesn't happen. But if it does, so if you, from an actuarial standpoint, if someone, we think they'll live till 90 and they end up living till 95, the organization continues to pay those annuity payments.
Where is the 150 in the interim? Is it?
Yep, it's a great question. It's invested.
But I mean, who has title to it? The charity or a trust or what?
It's in a gift annuity. So Catholic Charities, for example, is partnering with the St. Paul and Minnesota Foundation. So we administer those gifts. They're invested so that they're growing over time. And then we take care of all of the payments and things like that. So the organization
On
isn't
behalf of
using the dollar.
charity. On behalf of the charity.
Yep, exactly.
Okay. That's enough questions.
No, thank you, Frank. I appreciate your questions. And it's sometimes these vehicles, when you're a fundraiser, we think, it makes sense and we have all the technical jargon in our head. So I appreciate your questions a lot.
Well, I have one more. So what is
Great.
the 4.3%? That's not interest. It's something other than an interest rate.
Right. It's the payout rate to the individual. So based on his age, it was appropriate to pay out 4.3% every year. And while it's not the interest rate, it's taking into consideration, what do we think the market will actually provide, so that we're not dipping into principal. We're not letting the dollars run out.
I should be able to do this in my head, but the 6,450 annuity payment each year is 150,000 times 4.3%.
Yes.
Okay, now
Yep.
I got it.
Yep.
And that number doesn't change. That number stays constant for the rest of his life, for as long as the annuity is paid.
Yep, exactly. It's a set amount.
Okay.
Awesome. Any other questions that I can answer specifically about charitable gift annuities or really about anything else related to charitable estate planning?
Mariah, the only comment I would make is if he were to take $150,000 of cash and give it to a gift annuity, he's also then saying he doesn't need that $150,000 for any kind of purchases for his own needs. So that's extra monies. The way you presented it to begin with, he was living on the 150 and the 75. So I think he loses control of the 150 completely when he makes the gift.
Yep, you're completely right. He does. Yep. And that's part of the reason he's able to get that tax deduction is you're making an exchange, you're giving up control to the charitable organization. So yeah, you're correct. You're correct. I probably didn't position that the correct way, but you're right.
Isn't it also the case that the 6,450 in part reflects the return of principal? That's the tax-free portion?
Yep. Yep,
So
exactly.
he's not giving up the 150 entirely, because some portion of that principal will come back to him, and on an actuarial basis, if 1,000 people did this, it would come out on average just right.
Yes. So yes, he is getting that. He's guaranteed that income stream from the annuity, but if in 10 years he says, well, actually, I want the whole thing back. I want to just cancel the annuity. He can't do that.
Right, but the charity is betting that it can earn more on the 150 then the rate it's paying out to him from both income and capital.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah, okay.
Agreed. Great. Well, I really appreciate just getting to be with all of you. Before I'm going to turn it back to Paul, I just want to encourage you with a few kind of next steps. I would love for you to continue, like I said earlier, to think about your values. How are they represented in your estate plans? Do your kids or your heirs know about them? These are fun conversations. We're heading into the holiday season. And so how can you have these conversations with those that you're sharing a meal with? I know I love hearing from my siblings and other people in my life what they value. Even though we all grew up in the same house, we have very different priorities, and that's great. So think about having those conversations this holiday season. Share your values with your heirs if you haven't already. And then, as an example, if the charitable gift annuity option sounds exciting to you, if you're at least interested and curious about it, reach out to Paul to get kind of an illustration that can help you see how it could be impactful for you and your planning. And Paul, I will turn it over to you.
Great. Thank you. Oh, yep. Thank you. Thank you, Mariah. I appreciate the time. I did also just want to say, as we talked earlier about all of the stuff that we think about and talk about, there isn't one magic bullet that solves all problems. And I think this is just one tool. And so I think what our encouragement to you is to at least start thinking about what you want to accomplish and what you want to do. And then if charitable planning comes into that, we'd love to have a conversation with you about how we might help in that, or there might be different tools, or I always talk about buckets and tools. We put things in different buckets, and what are the tools that we can use to help meet your goals. And myself, Mary Langfeld, who's also on the call, we'd love to have a conversation with you and just talk through some of those things. And if there's something that we can help with, we'd love to do that. My information was on that last slide, and you'll also get a follow-up email from me later today or tomorrow. And again, please feel free to reach out at any time. If there's other topics that you'd love to have in a webinar like this, this being our first one, we're going to do more, but if you have certain areas of interest, we'd love to be able to make sure those topics are covered. So again, thank you so much for joining us this morning, and we look forward to seeing you again soon. Thanks so much. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you, Paul and Mariah.
Thanks very
Take
much.
care.
Yes, I think it was very useful.
Great. Thanks, Frank.
Thanks, Frank.
Bye-bye.
I know.